Craig Hall is a gardener and ISA certified arborist in the Gardens and Grounds team at the US Botanic Garden. He grew up gardening and still grows a wide variety of veggies at home, where he also keeps bees and raises chickens. Craig is also an avid forager and loves pawpaws, and we're coming up on pawpaw season, which is very exciting. We're so happy to have him here with us today. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks for having me, everyone. And yes, I do love pawpaws, and we're about 2 weeks away. I'm kind of counting down to be able to go pick some. So hopefully they'll be ripe when I go out and take a look. And the riper the better, in my opinion. So
Yeah, delicious.
This is an exciting time of year for me, for sure.
Yeah.
Aside from the other great things that are happening in the vegetable garden at this point. So.
Yeah, it's been a really productive time in the vegetable garden. I have a few photos too, if people are interested to see kind of a glimpse of what's been going on in the kitchen garden over the past few weeks.
Yes, lots of things.
There we go. So I wondered if you wanted to just start out, Craig, by talking a little bit about some of the things you've been harvesting lately at home and on site in the kitchen garden.
Yeah, well, I mean, on site, it's been, in the kitchen garden, it's been, daily we're harvesting. We've had probably yesterday, we had 74 pounds of produce, including eggplants, tomatillos, serrano peppers, a few watermelon are in there as well. And some cherry tomatoes as well. So things are going. Yeah, there's corn as well, and cucumbers. Those have been phenomenal this year, and the green peppers have been absolutely super prolific this year. So very thankful for the weather and the rain this year to prolong the harvest. This late into the year, usually it gets pretty dry and it becomes pretty tough to keep things watered. So we're super excited that we've been able to have a ton of produce this year out of the kitchen garden itself in such a small area, for sure. So absolutely grateful for that. But at home, I've had a ton of tomatoes. About 2 weeks ago was about the peak of tomato harvesting, and I'm still getting a few residual large yellow tomatoes. Brandywine tomatoes are coming in. Still, cherry tomatoes are pretty prolific, and they will be through September, so I'm happy about that. But also, with this humidity and tons of rain, comes some problems with the tomatoes as well, as you may or may not have been seeing in your garden. So you got to watch out for those. But hopefully the tomato harvest supersedes any problems that you may have.
Yeah, and Craig, I have a few photos when we were talking about the challenges people might be seeing with their summer crops, things like tomatoes and eggplants. So maybe you want to talk through a couple of those issues that people might be observing now, and I'll pull up some photos.
Yes, unfortunately, this is a photo of some of my eggplant at home, and with this humidity and heat, summer insects tend to just go wild. And as you can see here, this is flea beetle damage, and particularly they target eggplants. I don't know what it is about eggplant. I'm getting really frustrated with eggplant in general because of flea beetles, and the flea beetles, they're these little black insects, almost look like little black specks, and they just go to town on eggplant leaves specifically. I've also noticed them on tomatoes, but for whatever reason they decimate eggplants. I'm kind of running out of options. I've been mixing up a little bit of horticulture oil and applying a little bit here and there just to mitigate some of the problems that they're having. But I'm reluctant enough to harvest a few eggplants despite dealing with flea beetles on a regular basis. So yeah, the humidity and heat have not been good for the reproduction of flea beetles, especially on eggplant. So yeah, watch out for those at this time of year if you have eggplants.
Thanks. And then I have a couple of tomato photos too. Maybe you want to talk us through those.
Yep. Yeah, this is a picture of one of my tomatoes that has succumbed to blossom end rot. Unfortunately, it was big, beautiful yellow brandywine tomato. Didn't quite make it. Didn't quite make it to ripening before blossom end rot essentially took care of it. And really, preventative of blossom end rot is to have adequate calcium in your soil and adequate means of the calcium being absorbed. So with that being said, that's making sure your tomatoes are adequately watered from the roots, or mainly around the roots, as opposed to overhead watering. And blossom end rot usually is a problem with many Stolen ACA crops, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and it's generally a brown spot on an otherwise beautiful fruit or tomato or pepper on the bottom, and it's pretty demoralizing because you'll have a big red tomato and this big ugly brown spot on it. You can eat around it, but it kind of just ruins the aesthetic of a beautiful big red tomato. Preventative treatments. There's no sort of fungicide sprays that can prevent it. It's more of a nutrient deficiency. So adding compost, fresh composted organic material every year is probably the best way to go to prevent blossom end rot in the following season. Adding it in the winter or late fall after you pull your old tomato crops up is the best time to do it. Adding eggshells or gypsum is good. It provides calcium for the soil. But also crop rotation is key as well. If you plant tomatoes in one area of the garden, just switch it around next year and plant your tomatoes at some other portion of the garden that they weren't planted the year before. That helps mitigate any sort of soil-borne diseases in general that are specific to tomatoes. But it just overall helps with cultural issues and cultural problems that may arise, and other sort of bacterial diseases that are soil-borne. So it's a good idea to do crop rotation and add organic matter, organic fertilizer yearly to prevent some of this blossom end rot problems.
You were getting into some of the maintenance tasks people might be interested in thinking about at this time of year. Do you want to talk about some of the tasks that you typically do at this point? What are some of the most important tasks people may be wanting to think about as we get into the late summer and start to think about early fall?
Right. Well, this time of year with humidity and heat, weeds are going crazy, and getting the weeds before they go to seed is the best way to do it, or best thing to tackle, or the most important thing to tackle this time of year. Yanking them out, staying on top of them is a big challenge. Oftentimes I use wood chips and mulch and hay to kind of suppress weeds. But just spending time weeding regularly is really an important task this time of year. Keeping them from reseeding for next year. The more work you do now, the less you'll have to do in the spring when they start coming up. But also you'll be able to make space for gardening for the fall, planting your fall crops as well. Getting that soil tilled up, getting that ready to go for fall crops is also a great thing to do this time of year. Unfortunately, if it's extremely hot, don't go out there and overexert yourself. Wait till the evening or early morning and just do little bits here and there. that'll make a big difference as far as your tolerance of heat and the abilities that you'll be able to take care of what you need to without getting heat exhaustion. So, just stay on top of your weeds this time of year, and you'll definitely be rewarded next year with less weeds when you're planting. So just be aware when you till for this season or the fall season that you tend to bring up a lot of weed seeds. So make sure you manage your weeds. Pretty much can't argue with that. Everyone hates doing it, but it's just part of gardening.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So I think what we can do now is turn over to some of the questions that people are submitting in the chat, and we'll spend sort of the next little bit of the program going through those, so people can continue to submit as something comes up in your mind. We had one question that I could address, which is what happens to the produce from the kitchen garden. We saw a photo of the kitchen garden and then sort of that cart full of produce. What we've been doing is working with a local food rescue organization that distributes all sorts of food, including produce, to food programs around the DC area. So each time we have sort of a critical mass of a harvest that's ready to go, the Gardens and Grounds team will reach out and let me know that it's time to do a donation, and then we'll call them up, and we've had a good experience kind of having them come and pick up and distribute that food around the city. Anything you would add to that, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, the kitchen garden alone, it produces so much great produce, and I can't see a better way of using it than sending it to people that need it. So absolutely, I think it's a great thing what we're doing out there for sure.
Yeah, and if people are interested to see more about that, if you follow the U.S. Botanic Garden on social media, usually each time we do a donation, we'll post photos of what got harvested, so you can kind of follow along with what's going on in the kitchen garden that way too.
Right. Yeah, and it's also interesting when we're harvesting out there. It's we're actually learning as well. We're not just picking whatever we see. It's understanding when certain things are right. Different for okra, for example. There's a short period of ripening time when the okra is tender and soft, and if you let it go too long, it becomes too woody and almost unpalatable. So, making sure that we're out there harvesting at the right time, and same goes for peppers and everything, eggplant for that matter. Getting it at the right time means it'll last longer, and as we ship it around, or it won't spoil or rot in between now and when somebody is about to start cooking it. So making sure, sometimes we get stuff that's a little bit earlier, so it'll last a little longer between when we harvest it and when someone comes and picks it up for distribution. So just understanding how the shelf life of each fruit or vegetable is important, and that's how some of the things that I'm taking in while we're doing these harvests. So I think that's important to understand, and you can take that home and use that. In when you're cooking yourself, you go to the grocery store and buy certain fruits and vegetables. You begin to understand how the time period you have between when you buy it and when you purchase it, and when you're going to cook it. So you're essentially not wasting it. So I think that's kind of interesting way to look at the harvesting situation at the gardens.
Yeah, it's been a good learning process, I think, for all of us to
absolutely.
We have a few questions about pests, so maybe I'll go over to those.
Sure.
Somebody asked, their backyard garden has white flies. Do you have any organic ways to get rid of them? And they're specifically asking if neem oil is okay.
Neem oil. Neem oil is probably about, or horticulture mineral oil. are probably the two most organic, easy to acquire methods as far as spraying for whiteflies. Um, but yeah, the problem with those is sometimes if you mix too much, they tend to burn leaves with this hot weather. So you want to make sure you read the label and what the measurement per water mixing ratios are. So you get adequate coverage, and B, you don't cause any sort of phytotoxicity when you're spraying. It's not that it's bad. It's that any sort of oils or waxy sort of substance on leaves can prevent oxygen and CO2 exchange in the leaves. So on hot days that they're already struggling, so adding any sort of oil to their leaves can be an issue. So make sure you're doing it on a cool morning or early evening, and make sure you're following label requirements for mixing those organic insecticides for whiteflies. But yeah, those are both great ways to mitigate whiteflies. Also, making sure there's adequate space between your plants. If you prune quite a bit, you may have to start pruning quite a bit if they start growing big, and the leaves get close in between other plants. Those insects tend to breed in dark, damp, moist areas, and having good airflow between your vegetable plants is also important. And that's something to think about, early on in the season to prevent pests later.
Thanks.
So yeah.
Thanks. That's great. We also have a question about aphids. This person said, I've never had an aphid issue until this year. And then in early July, they devastated some perennials and have now found the basil. Do you have maintenance methods that you would recommend to keep aphids to a minimum?
Yeah. I mean, same kind of goes for the whiteflies. If you want to take that spray route, neem oil or horticulture oil really helps. But keeping also pruning off some of the newer growth. Aphids tend to gravitate or swarm on newer young growth because the stems and leaves are tender. Therefore, they're able to suck the juices out easier. So keeping up on pruning is important. Also, don't over fertilize. When you over fertilize some of these plants, they tend to, especially with high nitrogen, they tend to produce a lot of new shoots or suckers really, really fast. And, with all that new growth, aphids tend to move right in because it's tender. And, as you can tell, if you've ever seen aphids, they're always at the tip of the the flower stalk or the new leaf stalk. So try to avoid over fertilizing, and once again, also keep adequate separation, keep up on pruning and thinning. Good airflow also provides for a healthy plant. And when a plant tends to show stress is when insects tend to move in. And that's just, insects are going to take advantage of a situation where they can, the plant isn't building up enough, essentially, I guess more or less antibodies to protect, or they can't build up the defenses to protect from an insect invasion. So avoid stressors stressors of those certain plants will help mitigate the aphids. And if that's still an issue, then look towards the organic spray methods as far as neem oil or horticulture oil. And same goes for that. Make sure you read the label when you mix, and avoid hot temperatures when you're spraying.
Thanks, Greg.
Yep.
We have a couple questions about planting. One person says they live in Maryland with very sandy soil and have had no luck with garlic and onion. They were very small or died early in the season. They're wondering, is sandy soil good for garlic and onion? And do you have suggestions for how to improve this situation?
So, yes, and I love garlic and onions, and for a while there, I at home I was having some trouble as well. Um, any and then I started to kind of experiment, and I realized that planting garlic in the fall and letting it overwinter is the best route to go, and making sure that your soil. I mean, it sounds like you have sandy soil, so that's great for any sort of root or bulb type vegetables. With when you have a bulb vegetable, wet clayey soil tends to hold more moisture, and that can be a problem because those bulbs rot. So if you have good, well drained, um, essentially tilled soil, that keeps those bulbs from rotting. But specifically with garlic, and it possibly might be with onions in this area, planting garlic in the fall, about October, um, I've had the best success. So when you plant garlic in October, usually garlic comes in a whole bulb. So you want to split those cloves up and plant into each individual clove, maybe about 4 or 5 inches apart, enough for a bulb to expand, and plant those in rows, and then cover them up, and you'll probably get some green shoots into November, into December. They'll shoot up green shoots, and then they'll kind of slowly start to die off when it gets colder. But come about late February, March, those green shoots will start to shoot up again. And I've realized that garlic is best planted in the fall, because by June, you're starting to get flowers. And when flowers on your garlic start to show up, you want to pull those off. That forces the plant to make a bigger bulb. And by about early July, you should be ready to go. Early to mid July, when the leaves start to turn yellow, that's when you harvest garlic. And I think the same goes for onions. I haven't personally tried onions. I haven't had much success, but garlic I've had great success with planting in the fall and harvesting in mid July. Often onion sets are available, or seeds for onions are available in early spring. The best bet is to try starting those onion seeds in about February, and then transplanting them outside in March. And one of the tricks that I've heard is to, as the onion bulb starts to form, is to keep pushing the soil away from each bulb, whether it be by hand or a small trowel, and that allows the bulb to expand. And then by August or July or August, the onion should be ready to be pulled. But the main thing, for garlic, in my experience, is plant in the fall and harvest in July, and make sure you pull the garlic scapes off. You can also eat those as well, but pull the garlic scapes off, and that forces the plant to produce a larger bulb.
How about crops that people might be wanting to transplant for fall? Things like broccoli or cauliflower plants. Like, when is the right time to do that?
Transplant from seedlings into, yeah. So I would still wait a little bit if you're starting your seeds from plugs, or let's say you're going to the grocery store, and the nursery, and picking up broccoli plugs. Unless you want to be out there watering fairly frequently with all this heat, you could probably wait till about mid-September. If they're already grown up and sizable, a couple inches tall, you could probably wait till mid-September to plant those with some cooler nights. Once your watering goes a long way, with those cooler nights and cooler mornings this time of year, and as hot as it's been. So if you don't want to, if you want to avoid watering twice a day at this point, I would wait till September to plant any sort of transplants, broccoli transplants. And same goes for, same that broccoli applies to kind of the same life cycle as collards and kale. They can tolerate that frost, but they'll be available generally through most of the winter.
Thanks. And then how about planting carrots? Do you plant carrots in the fall ever? And if so, do you have tools or tricks that you use to kind of get the spacing right, or what sort of approach do you take to that?
Yeah, carrots. Yeah, you can definitely do carrots in the fall, and now would be the time to start the seeds, and you'll probably be harvesting maybe in about November. So yeah, go for it as far as carrots. Carrots usually grow fairly rapidly, so giving them adequate spacing, and I know it's really difficult with the carrot seeds are very tiny. I often just direct sow carrots, and it's kind of a challenge to get them separated. So I like to do I usually pour the whole seed packet out in my hand, and just kind of do little pinches about, I don't know, every 6 to 8 inches. Just do a little pinch of seed. That kind of like spreads it out evenly amongst your rows or in your garden plot. And then, I wait about a week or two, and then a week and a half, and they should start germinating. And then I go back and thin some of the thicker areas. I just yank out some of the smaller carrots, carrot seedlings, and kind of create a little bit more separation. I know it can be wasting seed, but with those smaller seeds like that, it's, unless you have a seeding tool, which may cost some money. There are some out there. That's the best way to do it is to thin and give adequate space. That'll allow the roots to grow fairly large in the span of a couple of months. But if you haven't packed in, the roots tend to be smaller, and you won't get those big carrots that you're looking for. So make sure, as with any sort of smaller seed or root vegetable, give adequate space when sowing. And I like to do a little pinch. There are seeders available to make your life easier. So whichever you prefer. So.
Great, thank you. Someone is asking more about seed starting. And so maybe, do you want to talk about which crops do you typically direct seed for cool season? And then maybe you'll also talk about working in the greenhouse and sort of timing for summer crops that you might be transplanting.
Right. I really, cool season crops that I definitely direct sow that, but they still need some spacing. So you can't just willy-nilly kind of throw them out there. They still need to be spaced out because they're all root vegetables. Turnips, I usually direct sow. They germinate within a week. They're already sending up shoots. Carrots, I generally direct sow. Beets, Swiss chard, daikon, any sort of radishes, daikon radishes, red radishes. Those I tend to just kind of seed, direct sow, and they tend to do really well. I kind of like to just kind of disturb the soil a little bit, so birds or other animals don't really eat the seeds right off the top. So I like to kind of work it in just a little bit, kind of fluff the top of the soil after dispersing them. And they tend to go like gangbusters just from direct seeding. You can do plugs for those, and that helps. And that helps, later in the season. Let's say you wait till a little later, late March, to get your plants in. You can do plugs. I mean, it helps if you have a greenhouse, some way you can extend the season. homemade greenhouse, or, that really helps. I built a small greenhouse at my house, and that seems to help essentially extend the season and help get those seeds started early. It can be a challenge to keep the adequate temperature. You don't want to get them too hot, and you don't want to let them get too cold. So there's like a balance, and then it takes a little bit more. That takes a little bit more time and effort to mitigate, temperature control in your, homemade greenhouse. I've used a space heater to kind of help keep, start the germination process, but I've run into troubles where it gets too hot, and then any sort of new seedlings, they get burned up, or, it's been too cold, and, the temperature gradient and the temperature variables in early February, even in a greenhouse, sort of homemade greenhouse setting, can be a challenge. So you can also start them inside under lights, and usually they germinate pretty quickly, but if you have too much light and not enough bottom heat, they'll become really leggy really fast. So that can be a problem too. So there's a lot of different things you got to think about when you're starting, especially brassicas and mustards, because they germinate so fast. So there's sort of methods, and it's gardening's about experimenting. So just be open to experimentation, and try, if you have the resource available, build a small greenhouse if you got that time, if that's important to you. Otherwise, most of these can be direct sown early in the season. So if they'll still the yield is still really high versus plugs versus direct sown for those type of vegetables.
Yeah, thanks. And I think you brought up season extension. I think in our next Q&A, we're going to delve into that a little bit more as we're getting a little further into fall. So that'll be
cool.
We have a few questions around troubleshooting. One is that someone's asking, how do you fend off caterpillar from the cabbage white eating up kale? Do you cover for shade, maybe for preventing the butterflies from laying eggs? Do you have any strategies for that?
Yeah. Row covers are great for cabbage. They definitely help the butterflies from landing, and when they come, they land and they produce eggs, and their caterpillars come out quick. If you can't do row covers, I just keep an eye on them and go in there and squish them myself. It's a little gruesome, but cabbage, a nice head of cabbage versus ones with holes in it, it's worth it to me to go in and squish them. And then if you're if the last resort, use there's organic products available using what's called spinosad, which is a organic gut bacteria that destroys caterpillars. So do your research before you use any of those products, but that's the best. The last resort method is what I use, is any sort of product containing that. But do your research from accredited resources when you go into that. So, the best, easiest method is to use row covers. That really helps the butterflies from landing, and if they're not landing, they're not laying eggs, and therefore you're not going to have caterpillars. So, and the best part about those row covers, they let airflow and oxygen in, as well as water, but they protect from bugs. So definitely use those row covers for sure.
Thank you. We have another question. Somebody said their romaine lettuce tasted very sour this spring. Is there a reason for that?
Yes. Lettuce. There's a very small window of, when you're going to have essentially non-bitter lettuce. And what happens is when the lettuce gets bitter, that means it's basically producing its flowers, and it starts to bolt. And around here, unfortunately, in Maryland, our spring season is usually fairly short. You get a couple warm days, you get pretty hot days, and usually that first one or two warm days really starts to trigger that lettuce to start bolting, and that's where you're going to get the sour taste. So planting lettuce early in the spring in Maryland DMV area, I'd say about mid to late March, right, is the best time. I find that starting lettuce from plugs versus direct sowing is the best method versus direct sowing directly into the ground. And starting your lettuce in the greenhouse is ideal. It allows it to grow a little larger, and then but you're still having head lettuce in cooler temperatures. But as soon as it warms up, you're gonna the lettuce is gonna be forced to bolt, and it's gonna start to taste sour. So there's a small window, I'd say, in this area that lettuce is crisp and not bitter, and it's probably from late March to, if you're lucky, beginning of May. But around here, it starts to become in the mid 80s, and by late April. So I'd say about a good month and a half at the most is your ideal lettuce harvesting time.
No, thanks. Yeah, and we have one more question about sort of that transitioning warm to cool. Somebody is asking, how do you replenish nutrients in the soil between summer and fall?
Using a liquid fertilizer is probably your best bet. The plants are usually hurting for water and some of the drier times between spring and fall. So mixing in, organic, a lot of fish emulsion, fertilizers out there, mixing that in with your watering routine really helps add nutrients to your soil while the plants are growing. That's probably the best solution during this time of year. They're uptaking, and they're definitely going to be uptaking water as soon as you water. So they're also uptaking those nutrients to the roots as well. Any sort of granular fertilizer or compost also works well. But those can be, if it's if some of those fertilizers or organic material, if it's placed around the roots and it's really hot, it can burn some of the roots or leaves. And also, if the compost hasn't had time to decompose, it can often, with the heat and humidity, the compost can tend to carry viruses and other bacteria that can be harmful to the roots. So making sure that your compost is adequately, if you're applying it to the soil, is adequately composted. But ideally, liquid fertilizer mixed in with your watering routine at the proper rate is your best bet for getting nutrients to your plants this time of year.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And we're almost at the end of our time, so I'll end with a final question for you, which is, what are you most looking forward to planting in the coming weeks?
Well, I'm just looking. I mean, first and foremost, I'm looking for some cooler weather. I'm more likely to be outside doing stuff in the garden when it's a little bit cooler. It's sweltering at this point. Yeah, I'd say my favorite is my utmost favorite is probably garlic. I use it constantly in cooking, and a little bit of garlic cloves and a little bit of garlic planting in the fall goes a long way. Next spring when I harvest, so I really like garlic. Collard greens are one of my favorites. It's funny, I have I never thought I'd ever hear this one, but we have a friend that owns an iguana as a pet, and she's the only. I grow so many collard greens that I can't eat them all, but we basically give the collard greens to her, like in bags and buckets, and she's like, "You don't have any more," because she feeds them to her iguana. So I keep growing them just for that reason. It keeps me
That's awesome.
But I never thought I'd ever have that issue, but
right.
but yeah, she takes bags and bags of them, and I mean, I give her as much as I can produce, but I also like to freeze them. They you can blanch them and put them in the freezer, and I add them instead of spinach to a lot of dishes, and I like to make southern style collard greens all winter long for Thanksgiving, and in through February. So I enjoy the flavor of them. Um, I enjoy and I enjoy keeping that iguana happy, I suppose.
Then I want to have right.
I never even thought about that, but it was just somebody asked me. I said, "You're really going to eat this much?" She's like, "No, it's for my lizard." Oh yeah, you have an iguana. And apparently, he only eats the collard greens. He won't eat them from the store. He only eats mine. So
Well, must be something to it.
yeah, it must be something to it. It must be natural soil. So
That's right. I like
yeah,
that.
strange, but yeah.
I like that. Well, Craig, thank you so much for being here today. This has been great. We always appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. And thanks everyone for joining us and for all the great questions you asked today.